The sun was setting over the city skyline, casting long shadows across the streets as Lena clutched her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. Fall was turning to winter, and the evening chill cut through her worn clothes. Her stomach had been empty for so long that the sharp pangs of hunger had dulled to a constant ache. A hollow feeling that never left her. 3 months ago, she had arrived in this country with her family and their savings, dreaming of a better life. Now at 19 years old, she found herself alone. Her parents had returned home to care for her grandmother, promising to send for her once they had enough money again. But the letters and small amounts of cash had stopped coming 2 weeks ago. Without proper papers, finding work had been impossible. The small room she had rented was no longer an option after she couldn't pay, and her belongings, except for the few items she carried in her backpack, were locked away by the landlord until she could settle her debt. Lena walked slowly down the busy street, watching people hurry home to warm houses and hot meals. Her fingers, long and slender, tapped against her leg as she walked, a habit from years of piano practice. Back home, she had been something of a local star, playing since she was 4 years old. Her teacher had once told her parents that Lena had the kind of talent that came along once in a generation. But talent didn't fill an empty stomach or provide a roof on cold nights. The smell hit her first, rich, savory aromas wafting from an open door as waiters carried trays of food to outdoor tables. Lena stopped, unable to help herself. The restaurant was clearly upscale. White tablecloths gleamed under soft lighting, and well-dressed people laughed over wine glasses. Through the large windows, she could see the warm glow inside, and something else that made her heart skip. A grand piano, black and glossy, sitting in the corner of the dining room. It had been weeks since she had touched a piano. Before losing her room, she had sometimes sneaked into the music building at the local university, finding an empty practice room where she could play for an hour or two, keeping her skills sharp. Music had always been her escape, her comfort when things got hard. Lena stood there longer than she should have, watching the diners and the untouched piano. A waiter noticed her staring and frowned, taking a step toward the door. She quickly moved along, embarrassed but couldn't bring herself to go far. Instead, she sat on a bench across the street, her gaze returning to the restaurant as an idea slowly formed. What did she have to lose? Pride? That luxury had disappeared days ago when she had searched through a trash bin behind a bakery for something to eat. The worst they could say was no, and she was used to rejection by now. Taking a deep breath, Lena crossed the street. She tried to smooth her wrinkled clothes and tuck her unwashed hair behind her ears before stepping through the door. The hostess looked up with a practiced smile that quickly faltered as she took in Lena's appearance. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her tone making it clear that she doubted she could. "I'd like to speak to the manager." "Please," Lena said quietly, her accent thick but her words clear. The hostess hesitated, then picked up a phone. Moments later, a tall man in a crisp suit appeared, looking Lena up and down with barely concealed impatience. "Yes? What is this about?" he asked, positioning himself to block her view of the dining room, as if worried she might make a dash for one of the tables. Lena swallowed hard. "My name is Lena. I noticed your piano." She gestured toward the instrument. "I was wondering if I could play. In exchange for some food." The manager's eyebrows shot up and his mouth twitched, not quite hiding his amusement. A server passing by overheard and paused, exchanging a glance with the hostess. "You want to play our piano? For food?" the manager repeated, loud enough that several nearby diners turned to look. A small group had gathered now, 2 more servers, the bartender leaning over the counter to listen, and a cook who had stepped out from the kitchen. Lena's cheeks burned, but she stood straight. "Yes, I'm a good player." "Very good." This brought a few chuckles from the staff. Lena knew how she must look to them, dirty, hungry, desperate. Not someone who would know how to handle the expensive instrument in their elegant restaurant. "Where did you study?" the manager asked, crossing his arms. His tone suggested he was playing along with a joke. "Music Academy of my city for 12 years, she answered truthfully. "I was going to apply for conservatory before we had to leave." Another server had joined the group, whispering something that made the others laugh. Lena felt smaller with each passing second, but the smell of food and the sight of the piano kept her rooted to the spot. The manager seemed to be enjoying himself now. "And what would you play for us if we let you?" "Classical. Chopin, Liszt, Rachmaninoff. Or popular songs if you prefer," she answered, her voice gaining a little strength when speaking about music. The manager exchanged glances with his staff, all of them clearly entertained by what they saw as an absurd request. A few diners were watching the scene unfold with curious expressions. "Well," the manager said, drawing out the word, "this is certainly an unusual request. I don't think we've ever had someone offer to perform for their supper." More snickers followed. Lena's hands trembled slightly, but she kept her gaze steady. "Just a small meal. I haven't eaten in 2 days." Something in her voice must have touched the manager because his smile faltered slightly. He glanced at the piano, then back at Lena. "Tell you what," he said, clearly still expecting to be amused by the outcome. "If you can actually play something worth hearing, and I mean really play, not just peck at the keys, I'll give you dinner. How's that sound?" The staff were grinning now, some nudging each other, anticipating what they assumed would be an awkward performance. A wealthy-looking couple at a nearby table were watching with undisguised interest, the woman whispering behind her hand to her partner. "Thank you," Lena said simply. "I'll play well for you." The manager gestured grandly toward the piano like a ringmaster introducing an act. "Then please entertain us." Walking through the restaurant was like running a gauntlet. Lena felt eyes on her from every table, taking in her worn shoes, her faded jeans, her thin jacket. She heard whispers, saw smirks, felt judgment with every step. The piano, at least, was a welcome sight. A Steinway, well maintained from what she could see. She sat at the bench, adjusting it slightly, and placed her hands in her lap for a moment. The restaurant had grown quieter, with most conversations pausing as people waited to see what would happen. The manager stood a few feet away, arms still crossed, watching with an expression caught between amusement and curiosity. Lena closed her eyes briefly, gathering herself. In this moment, she wasn't hungry or homeless or alone. She was just a musician about to play. Her fingers, though cold, were limber and ready. This was what they were made to do. She began with a soft touch, the opening notes of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor filling the space between tables. The piece started gently, almost questioning, perfect for setting the scene. Within seconds, she was lost in the music, her fingers finding the keys as naturally as breathing. As the complexity of the piece grew, Lena's body swayed slightly, her face transforming. The weariness and hunger seemed to fall away as she played the difficult runs and emotional passages with the skill of someone who had dedicated thousands of hours to her craft. The ballade told a story beginning softly, building to moments of tremendous power and passion, then returning to tender, heartbreaking beauty. In her mind, Lena saw her teacher's small studio back home, smelled the familiar scent of books and furniture polish, felt the satisfaction of mastering a difficult passage. She remembered her mother's face, proud and tearful during recitals, and her father working extra hours to pay for her lessons. She poured all of it, her love for music, her fear, her hunger, her hope, into the Steinway. She was only vaguely aware of the changing atmosphere in the restaurant. The snickers had stopped. Conversations had halted mid-sentence. A server stood frozen, tray in hand, listening instead of delivering food. The manager's arms had uncrossed, his mouth slightly open as he stared at her hands moving across the keyboard with precision and artistry that could only come from years of dedicated training. Lena played the final notes of the ballade, letting them hang in the air before slowly lifting her hands from the keys. For a moment there was complete silence in the restaurant. Then someone began to clap. Others joined in, the applause growing until it filled the room. When Lena finally looked up, she saw expressions of astonishment, appreciation, and in some cases shame at how quickly they had judged her. The manager stood completely still, his earlier smugness replaced with genuine surprise. A server nearby was wiping away tears, and an older man at a corner table was shaking his head in wonder. Someone had taken out a phone and was recording. That would... The manager started, then stopped, searching for words. That was extraordinary. Where did you learn to play like that? Lena looked down at her hands, now trembling slightly from emotion and hunger. I told you. I studied for many years. Music is... She paused, looking for the right words in her limited English. Music is the only thing I brought with me that couldn't be taken away. The restaurant remained unusually quiet, the typical dinner chatter subdued as people processed what they had just witnessed. The manager's face had transformed, the mockery replaced by respect and a hint of embarrassment at his earlier attitude. Well, he said, clearing his throat, I believe I promised you dinner. Would you? Would you play another piece while we prepare something for you? Lena nodded, relief washing over her. As she turned back to the piano, she noticed a well-dressed man at a corner table watching her intently, making notes on a napkin. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change course again. For now, though, the promise of food was enough. Lena placed her fingers on the keys once more and began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune. Its gentle, dreamy quality filling the restaurant as the sun finished setting outside, turning the world to darkness except for this warm room where, at least for tonight, she had found a place to belong. The restaurant had transformed into something magical. The same space that had felt so unwelcoming to Lena just minutes before now wrapped around her like a warm blanket as she played the final notes of Clair de Lune. The gentle Debussy piece had cast a spell over the dining room, creating a moment of shared beauty that bridged the gap between the hungry pianist and the well-fed audience. When she finished, the applause was immediate and genuine. Lena looked up to see faces soft with appreciation rather than hard with judgment. An elderly woman at a nearby table wiped a tear from her cheek, and a young couple held hands across their table, leaning toward each other as if the music had drawn them closer. The manager approached the piano, his earlier mockery replaced by something like awe. "That was beautiful," he said, his voice stripped of its previous condescension. "We have a table ready for you. Would you like to eat now, or—" He gestured to the piano. "I can play more," Lena said quickly, worried that if she stopped, the magic would break and they would remember she was just a homeless girl who hadn't showered in days. "After I eat, maybe?" The manager nodded, understanding crossing his face. "Of course. You must be hungry. This way, please." He led her to a small table near the back of the restaurant, partially hidden by a decorative screen. Lena suspected this was as much to shield the other diners from her appearance as to give her privacy, but she was too grateful to care. A server appeared almost immediately with a basket of warm bread and a bowl of soup that sent steam rising into the air. "The chef is preparing a full meal for you," the server explained, a young woman who now smiled at Lena with genuine warmth. "But he thought you might want something right away." Lena's hands trembled as she reached for the bread. "Thank you," she whispered, trying to remember her manners even as hunger clawed at her insides. The soup was rich and creamy, warming her from the inside out. The bread was crusty on the outside, soft within, and still hot from the oven. Lena had to force herself to eat slowly, knowing that her shrunken stomach might rebel if she gobbled everything too quickly. Each spoonful was savored, each bite of bread chewed thoroughly. She hadn't tasted anything this good in weeks. As she ate, she became aware of movement around the restaurant. People were whispering, glancing her way, some even leaving their tables to approach the manager. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but their gestures toward the piano made their requests clear. The news of the unexpected virtuoso had spread throughout the dining room. The well-dressed man she had noticed earlier appeared beside her table, clearing his throat softly to get her attention. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I hope I'm not disturbing your meal," he said, his voice gentle. "My name is Robert Chen. I'm the director of the city's music conservatory." Lena nearly choked on her soup. The conservatory was famous even in her home country, a prestigious institution that had produced world-class musicians for generations. "I was having dinner with my wife," he continued, gesturing to an elegant woman still seated across the room, "when you began to play. Your Chopin was—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Revelatory. There's a depth of understanding in your interpretation that's quite rare, especially in someone so young." Lena stared at him, bread halfway to her mouth, unable to process that this important man was speaking to her as if she were a colleague rather than a beggar. "May I?" He gestured to the empty chair across from her. She nodded, hastily swallowing her bite of bread. "Yes, please. I'm sorry for—" She gestured vaguely at herself, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. Robert waved away her apology as he sat down. "Music speaks louder than appearances. Where did you study?" As Lena told him about her teachers back home and the small music academy where she had spent most of her childhood, a server arrived with a plate of roasted chicken, vegetables, and potatoes. The aroma made her mouth water, but she tried to focus on the conversation. "Please eat," Robert encouraged. "We can talk while you have your dinner." Between careful bites, Lena shared her story. How her family had come to this country with such high hopes. How things had fallen apart. How she had ended up alone and hungry on the streets. Robert listened intently, his face growing more concerned with each detail. And your family now? You've had no word? Lena shook her head, cutting a small piece of chicken. The phone number doesn't work anymore. I tried to send a letter, but I don't know if it arrived. By now, the restaurant had returned to its normal hum of conversation, though Lena noticed people still glancing her way occasionally. The manager stopped by to check if she was enjoying her meal, his manner now respectful, almost deferential. It's wonderful, she assured him. The best food I've had in a very long time. He smiled, seemingly pleased by her praise. When you're finished, several guests have requested more music if you're willing. They've actually... He hesitated, looking slightly embarrassed. They've started a little collection for you. Tips, you might say. Lena's eyes widened. Of course I'll play more. The manager nodded and walked away. Robert leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. Lena, I'd like to propose something. The conservatory has an international student program with some emergency housing available. It's meant for students who are already enrolled, but exceptions can be made in special cases. He pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it beside her plate. I believe you qualify as a very special case. Lena stared at the card, afraid to hope. You mean I could stay there? Temporarily, yes. And we could arrange for an audition. Scholarships are limited, but with your talent... He shrugged as if her acceptance was a foregone conclusion. Lena's fork clattered against her plate as her hand began to shake. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come to my office tomorrow morning, Robert replied with a gentle smile. 10 o'clock? The address is on the card. Before Lena could respond, a commotion at the front of the restaurant caught their attention. A large group had just entered, well-dressed people laughing loudly as the hostess tried to explain that they didn't have a reservation. Among them was a young woman who immediately locked eyes with Lena, her expression changing from casual amusement to shock. Lena, she called out, breaking away from her friends and hurrying over. Is that you? It took Lena a moment to recognize her. Tanya, a girl from her building who had arrived in the city around the same time as Lena's family. They had spoken a few times in the laundry room, bonding over their shared experience as newcomers. What are you doing here? Tanya asked, glancing between Lena and Robert, confusion evident in her face. I went by your apartment last week, but the landlord said you were gone. It's a long story, Lena said, suddenly self-conscious again in the presence of someone who knew her from before. Tanya was clearly doing well. Her clothes were fashionable, her hair recently styled, her manner confident. Robert stood, sensing the complicated emotions at play. I should return to my wife. Lena, remember, tomorrow at 10. He nodded politely to Tanya and walked away. Tanya slid into the chair he had vacated, her eyes wide with curiosity. Who was that? And how are you eating in this place? It's one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Lena explained about playing the piano in exchange for food, watching as Tanya's expression shifted from disbelief to amazement. You're kidding. They actually let you play? I had no idea you were that good. Tanya leaned closer, lowering her voice. But where have you been staying? Why didn't you call me when things got bad? Lena looked down at her half-eaten meal, shame washing over her. She had been too proud to reach out, too embarrassed by her family's failure to seek help from acquaintances who seemed to be thriving. I didn't want to be a burden, she admitted softly. Tanya reached across the table to squeeze her hand. Don't be silly. We newcomers have to stick together. She glanced around the restaurant, then back at Lena. Listen, my friends and I are celebrating tonight. My roommate just got engaged. Why don't you come join us after you finish here? You can stay at my place tonight. The offer was tempting, but Lena's gaze drifted to the piano. I promised I would play more. A sly smile spread across Tanya's face. Even better. Play for us, then come sit with us. My friends won't believe that I know an actual concert pianist. The thought of joining a celebration, of being treated as a person with something to offer rather than someone to be pitied, warmed Lena more than the food had. Okay, she agreed, returning Tanya's smile. As Tanya rejoined her friends, explaining animatedly who Lena was, the manager approached again. Ready for another performance? He asked. Lena nodded, wiping her mouth with her napkin and standing. As she crossed back to the piano, She noticed a small glass jar had been placed on top of it, already containing several bills and even what looked like a few business cards. She sat at the bench again, feeling different than she had just an hour before. Her stomach was full, she had somewhere to sleep tonight. And tomorrow held the promise of something she had thought lost forever, a chance to continue her music education. The restaurant quieted as she positioned her hands over the keys. This time she chose Liszt's Liebestraum, a piece about dreams of love. As she played the delicate, yearning melody, she felt something unfurling inside her, a cautious hope taking root. In the corner, Robert watched with his wife, nodding slightly as if confirming a decision already made. At the large table near the front, Tanya and her friends listened with surprised appreciation, seeing Lena not as the awkward immigrant girl from the laundry room, but as an artist. And behind the kitchen doors, the staff who had laughed at her request peeked out to watch, their earlier mockery replaced by something like respect and perhaps a lesson learned about judging someone based on appearances, alone. Morning sunlight streamed through unfamiliar curtains as Lena slowly opened her eyes. For a moment she felt disoriented. The soft couch beneath her was a far cry from the park bench or sheltered doorway she had grown accustomed to. Then she remembered Tanya's apartment, the celebration with her friends, the countless questions about Lena's piano playing. After her final performance at the restaurant, the tip jar had been passed around, filling with more cash than Lena had seen in months. The manager had counted it out for her, nearly $200, placing the money in an envelope along with a handwritten note. Come back anytime. Piano or meal, both waiting for you. Stretching, Lena heard movement in the kitchen. The smell of coffee drifted through the small apartment along with the sound of quiet humming. She sat up, folded the blanket Tanya had provided and smoothed down her wrinkled clothes, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance in the bright light of day. Good morning, Tanya called out, appearing in the doorway with 2 steaming mugs. I wasn't sure if you drank coffee, but I made some anyway. Lena accepted the cup gratefully. Thank you. For everything. The couch, letting me shower. The clothes. Tanya had insisted Lena borrow a clean outfit for today's meeting at the conservatory, claiming she never wore it anyway. It's nothing. Tanya waved away the thanks, settling into an armchair across from the couch. Your playing last night was incredible. My friends couldn't stop talking about it. She took a sip of coffee, studying Lena over the rim of her mug. Why didn't you ever mention you were that good? Lena shrugged, cupping her hands around the warm mug. It never came up. And back home I wasn't special, just another student with some talent. Well, you're special here, Tanya said firmly. That conservatory guy seemed to think so anyway. Are you really going to meet him this morning? Lena nodded, anxiety fluttering in her stomach at the thought. At 10. I keep thinking it's some kind of mistake that when he sees me in his office he'll wonder what he was thinking. Tanya snorted. Stop that. He heard you play, that's what matters. She glanced at her watch. We should leave in about an hour to make sure you're on time. I'll go with you, at least to the building. Relief washed over Lena. The thought of navigating the trip alone had been adding to her nervousness. Thanks. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't run into you last night. That's the funny thing about life, Tanya said, rising to refill her coffee. Sometimes the worst day turns into the best day when you least expect it. The conservatory building was imposing, a grand structure of stone and glass that spoke of tradition and excellence. Students carrying instrument cases moved purposefully through the entrance, their conversations creating a buzz of energy around the place. Lena stood on the sidewalk, frozen, Robert's business card clutched tightly in her hand. Go on, Tanya encouraged, giving her a gentle push. Text me when you're done and I'll meet you back here. She had already programmed her number into the cheap phone Lena had purchased with some of the tip money. Drawing a deep breath, Lena climbed the steps and pushed through the heavy doors. The lobby was spacious, with high ceilings and walls adorned with photographs of famous musicians. A security guard directed her to the administration wing, where a receptionist looked up expectantly. I'm here to see Robert Chen, Lena said, her voice smaller than she intended. I have an appointment at 10, the receptionist smiled. You must be Lena. He mentioned you would be coming. Go right in, second door on the left. Heart pounding, Lena walked down the hallway, her borrowed clothes feeling suddenly inadequate for such a place. She hesitated outside the door marked Robert Chen, director, then knocked softly. "Come in," called the now familiar voice. Robert's office was warm and cluttered in the most welcoming way. Books stacked on every surface, framed concert programs on the walls, and a baby grand piano in the corner. The man himself stood behind his desk, smiling as she entered. "Lena, right on time. Please sit down." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. As she sat, Robert studied her with kind eyes. "You look rested. Did you find somewhere to stay last night?" "Yes, an acquaintance was at the restaurant. She let me sleep on her couch." "Good, good." Robert settled into his chair. "Now about why you're here. After hearing you play last night, I'm convinced you belong in a program like ours. The question is how to make that happen given your—" He paused, searching for a diplomatic word. "Your current situation." Lena nodded, appreciating his directness. "I have no papers to study, no money for tuition, and nowhere to live," she summarized bluntly. Robert's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Direct and honest, I like that. Yes, those are the obstacles, but they're not insurmountable." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Let me tell you what I propose." Over the next half hour, Robert outlined a plan that made Lena's head spin. The conservatory had a special fund for exceptional international students, typically used for scholarships. In her case, they could provide emergency housing in the international student dormitory for 2 months, while they sorted out her visa status. There was a part-time position in the practice room scheduling office that could provide a small stipend. And most importantly, they would arrange an audition for the full scholarship program for the next academic year. In the meantime, Robert continued, "We'll offer you visitor status so you can audit classes and use our facilities to practice. The paperwork for your student visa will take some time, but we have an immigration attorney who helps our international students." Lena sat in stunned silence, afraid that if she spoke she might wake up from what surely must be a dream. "There's one more thing," Robert added, reaching for a folder on his desk. "Several of my colleagues were at the restaurant last night. I took the liberty of mentioning your situation to them." He slid the folder across to her. "These are some opportunities they suggested." Inside were several typed notes, an invitation to perform at a faculty recital next month, an offer to play at weekend brunches at a hotel downtown, a request for piano lessons from a doctor's wife who had been dining at the next table, and, most surprising, an invitation to audition for a local orchestra that needed a pianist for an upcoming concert series. I don't know what to say," Lena finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. Robert smiled gently. "You don't need to say anything. Your playing last night said everything necessary." He stood up, walking to the piano in the corner. "However, I would like to hear you play once more if you don't mind. Something different this time, perhaps some Bach?" Lena joined him at the piano, settling onto the bench. The keys felt like old friends beneath her fingers as she began the opening of Bach's Prelude in C major from the well-tempered clavier. The piece was like a mathematical equation expressed in sound, precise and perfect. As she played, she was aware of Robert watching intently, his trained ear catching every nuance. When she finished, he nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Excellent control. Your technique is solid." He closed the piano lid gently. "I'd like you to meet our piano faculty this afternoon if you're available. Professor Wu has a studio of very talented students, but I think you would be a valuable addition." "Of course," Lena agreed quickly. The thought of meeting professional piano instructors both terrified and thrilled her. "Good. Now let me show you around the facilities before lunch. I think you'll find our practice rooms quite adequate." Robert led her from the office into the hallway. "The dormitory where you'll be staying is just across the courtyard. It's not luxurious, but it's comfortable and safe." As they walked through the conservatory, students and faculty nodded respectfully to Robert. Some glanced curiously at Lena, probably wondering who this unfamiliar young woman was, being given a personal tour by the director himself. They passed practice rooms where snippets of music, violin scales, trumpet fanfares, vocal exercises, created a chaotic but somehow harmonious backdrop. In one larger room, a chamber group rehearsed intently, the musicians leaning toward each other as they navigated a difficult passage. "This is where most of the magic happens," Robert said, gesturing to the practice area. Talent is wonderful, but it's the hours spent here that make the difference between good and great. Lena nodded, remembering the countless hours she had spent practicing in much less impressive surroundings. I'm not afraid of hard work. I can see that, Robert replied. It shows in your playing. They continued to the performance hall, a breathtaking space with perfect acoustics and a stunning concert grand piano center stage. Student recitals are held here monthly, Robert explained. Faculty performances weekly, and if all goes well with your audition, you'll play here too. Lena gazed at the stage, imagining herself sitting at that magnificent piano, playing for an audience that had come specifically to hear her. Just days ago, such a thought would have seemed laughably impossible. Now it felt like a path being cleared before her. As they left the hall, Robert checked his watch. We should head to the cafeteria. Professor Wu will meet us there, and you must be hungry. Lena realized she was indeed starving. The enormity of everything that had happened in the last 24 hours had pushed hunger aside, but now it returned with a vengeance. In the busy cafeteria, filled with students grabbing lunch between classes, Robert led her to a table where a petite, elegant woman waited. Her sharp eyes assessed Lena immediately, taking in everything from her borrowed clothes to the way she carried herself. Professor Wu. This is Lena, the pianist I told you about, Robert said, making the introduction. Lena, Professor Wu heads our piano department. It's an honor to meet you, Lena said, suddenly feeling every bit the homeless girl playing for scraps. Professor Wu's face remained impassive. Robert speaks very highly of your playing. I look forward to hearing it myself. Her tone was neither warm nor cold, merely professional. Tell me about your training. As they settled at the table with trays of food, Lena described her musical education, the small academy back home, her primary teacher who had studied in Moscow, the competitions she had won as a child. Professor Wu listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions about technique or repertoire. Lena felt as though she were already in an audition, every answer being weighed and measured. But there was something reassuring about the professor's seriousness. This was a world where talent and dedication mattered more than appearances or circumstances. For the first time in months, Lena felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity that left Lena breathless. Her small room in the international student dormitory felt like a palace after her nights on the streets. A single bed with clean sheets, a desk for studying, a shared bathroom down the hall that she could use whenever she needed. The simple luxury of having a safe place to sleep and a door that locked brought tears to her eyes that first night. Professor Wu had wasted no time putting Lena to work. After a formal audition where Lena played selections from Bach, Chopin, and Rachmaninoff, the piano faculty had collectively agreed to accept her into their program, pending resolution of her visa issues. In the meantime, they created a rigorous practice schedule that kept her at the piano 6 to 8 hours each day. Your technique is excellent, Professor Wu had told her after the audition, her tone matter-of-fact rather than complimentary. But there are gaps in your repertoire we need to address, and your interpretation of the romantic composers needs refining. Coming from Professor Wu, this was high praise indeed. Lena had quickly learned that the diminutive woman was famous for her exacting standards and sparse encouragement. Other students whispered that a single nod from Wu was worth more than effusive praise from other instructors. Today, Lena sat at a practice room piano, working through a particularly challenging passage of Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata. Professor Wu had assigned it yesterday, calmly stating that Lena should have the first movement ready for review by the end of the week, a task that would normally take a student a month to prepare. Her fingers stumbled over the same rapid sequence of notes for the third time, and she sighed in frustration. The piece was pushing the limits of her technical abilities, which she suspected was exactly why Wu had chosen it. Outside the practice room window, autumn leaves swirled across the courtyard. Students hurried between buildings, collars turned up against the chill wind, carrying instrument cases of various sizes. A knock at the door interrupted her practice. She turned to see David, a graduate student who worked in the scheduling office where Lena had begun her part-time job. Sorry to bother you, he said, but there's a call for you at the front desk. They said it's important, Lena frowned. No one called her. She had only given the conservatory's number to Tanya as an emergency contact, and they usually texted instead. Did they say who it is? David shook his head. Just that it's international and they've been trying to reach you. Her heart suddenly racing, Lena followed David through the maze of practice rooms to the administration building. Could it be her parents? Had they finally found a way to contact her? At the front desk, the receptionist handed her the phone with a smile. "Line 2, dear." With trembling hands, Lena took the receiver. "Hello? Lena?" A familiar voice crackled over the line, distorted by distance but unmistakable. "Is that really you, Mama?" Lena gasped, gripping the counter for support. "Mama, yes, it's me. Where are you? Are you okay? Is Papa with you?" The sound of her mother crying came through the line, followed by rapid speech in their native language. "We've been so worried. The neighbor gave us your letter last week. It had been sitting in our old mailbox all this time. We've been trying to call you at the old apartment, but of course there was no answer." Lena switched to her mother tongue, the familiar sounds bringing both comfort and a wave of homesickness. She explained quickly about losing the apartment, about her time on the streets, and finally, her voice brightening, about the restaurant and the conservatory. "You're studying music again? Oh, Lena, your father will be so happy to hear this." Her mother's voice was thick with emotion. "We've been worried sick, thinking the worst when we couldn't reach you." "I'm fine now, Mama, better than fine. But what about you and Papa? Where are you? Why did you stop writing?" There was a pause on the line, then her mother sighed. "Your grandmother's health got worse. We had to sell our phone to pay for her medicine. The mail service in the village is unreliable at best. We've been taking turns working at the local farm to make ends meet." Another pause. "But we never stopped trying to reach you, never stopped worrying." Lena wiped tears from her cheeks, aware of the receptionist politely pretending not to notice. "Is grandmother better now?" "A little. The doctor says she's stable." Her mother's voice brightened. "But now tell me more about this music school. Are they treating you well? Do you have enough to eat?" Lena laughed through her tears. No matter the circumstances, her mother's primary concern would always be whether she was eating properly. "Yes, Mama. They feed us in the cafeteria here, and I have a small job that pays enough for extras." They talked for 10 more minutes, exchanging information and reassurances. Her parents would stay with her grandmother for now, but they had found steady work in the village. Things weren't easy, but they were surviving. Lena gave them the conservatory's address and phone number, promising to find a way to call them regularly. "We are so proud of you," her mother said before hanging up. "You were always the strong one, our little fighter. Play your beautiful music and know that we are thinking of you every day." When the call ended, Lena sat in the reception area for a long moment, processing everything. Her family was alive and safe. They hadn't abandoned her. The relief was so powerful it made her dizzy. The receptionist discreetly pushed a box of tissues toward her. "Good news, I hope?" "The best," Lena replied, managing a watery smile. "My family is okay. They've been trying to find me." "Family is everything," the receptionist nodded wisely. "Now, I believe you have a lesson with Professor Wu in 20 minutes. You might want to splash some cold water on your face before then. She doesn't approve of emotional displays during lessons, says they interfere with technique." Lena laughed, the sound startling her with its lightness. "Thank you. For everything." "Again," Professor Wu said, her face impassive as she stood beside the piano. "The transition into the development section lacks conviction. You're playing the notes, but you're not telling the story." Lena nodded, positioning her hands over the keys once more. She had been working on the Beethoven sonata for nearly 2 hours, and her fingers were beginning to tire. But she knew better than to mention this to Wu, who famously practiced 8 hours a day well into her 70s. This time, as she approached the transition, Lena thought of her mother's voice on the phone, of the weeks of worry suddenly lifted from her shoulders. She poured that emotional release into the music, letting the notes swell and recede like waves of relief washing over her. When she finished the section, she looked up to find Professor Wu studying her with an unreadable expression. "Better," the professor said simply. "Much better." "What changed?" Lena hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I just heard from my family for the first time in months. They're okay. I was playing what that feels like." Wu nodded slowly. "Yes. That's exactly what Beethoven requires. Genuine emotion channeled through disciplined technique." She closed the music score. "Enough for today. Rest your hands and we'll continue tomorrow." Coming from Professor Wu, this was practically gushing praise. Lena carefully closed the piano lid, trying not to show how pleased she was. "Oh, and Lena," Wu added as she gathered her notes. "Director Chen mentioned that you've been invited to perform at the faculty recital next week. What are you planning to play?" The faculty recital. Lena had almost forgotten in the whirlwind of classes, practice, and work. It would be her first formal performance at the conservatory, a chance to show everyone that Robert's faith in her wasn't misplaced. "I was thinking of the Chopin Ballade, the one I played at the restaurant." "It's polished and ready to go." Professor Wu frowned slightly. "It's a fine piece and you play it well. But perhaps something less expected? Everyone plays Chopin." She tapped her fingers thoughtfully against her arm. "What about the Prokofiev you mentioned in your repertoire list? The Toccata in D minor?" Lena's eyes widened. The Prokofiev was a fiendishly difficult piece, all driving rhythm and dissonant harmonies. She had performed it once at her final recital before leaving home, and it had nearly broken her technically. But it was also a showstopper, the kind of piece that demonstrated both virtuosity and courage. "Are you sure? It's quite modern for a faculty audience." The corner of Wu's mouth twitched in what might almost have been a smile. This faculty could use some shaking up. "Besides, I have a feeling you understand Prokofiev's Defiance rather well." With that cryptic comment, she left Lena alone in the practice room, staring at her hands and wondering if she had just been given a compliment or a challenge. Probably both. The night of the faculty recital arrived far too quickly. Lena paced backstage, flexing her fingers and running through the Prokofiev in her mind. Through the curtain, she could hear the murmur of the audience as they filled the small recital hall. Professors, students, and various music patrons from the community. "Nervous?" a voice asked. She turned to see Robert approaching, elegant in a dark suit. "Terrified," she admitted. "This isn't like playing in the restaurant when no one expected anything from me. Everyone here knows music. They'll hear every mistake." Robert nodded sympathetically. "Yes, they will. And it won't matter because what they'll remember is your musicality, not your mistakes." He glanced at the program in his hand. The Prokofiev was a bold choice. Professor Wu's suggestion, actually. "Ah," Robert smiled knowingly. "She must think very highly of you then. Wu only suggests Prokofiev when she believes a student can handle both the technical demands and the emotional complexity." Before Lena could respond, the stage manager appeared. "5 minutes, Miss Lena. You'll be introduced after the string quartet." Robert gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You belong here," he said simply, then left her to her final preparations. From the stage came the delicate sounds of a Haydn quartet, pleasant, orderly, and utterly unlike the musical storm she was about to unleash. Lena closed her eyes, centering herself. She thought of the path that had brought her here, the hunger, the fear, the moment of desperation that led her to ask for food in exchange for music. She thought of her parents, working hard in a distant village, and of Tanya, who would be sitting in the audience tonight, witnessing this new chapter of Lena's life. The applause for the quartet signaled her turn. As she walked onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinded her. She bowed quickly, then sat at the magnificent grand piano, adjusting the bench, feeling the cool keys beneath her fingers. The audience faded away. There was only her and the music waiting to be born. With a deep breath, she began the Prokofiev, the driving rhythm like a heartbeat, insistent and alive. Her fingers flew across the keys, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. The piece was all controlled chaos, a perfect expression of her journey, dissonance resolving unexpectedly into moments of startling beauty. As the final crashing chords reverberated through the hall, Lena felt something shift inside her. She was no longer the girl who played for food. She was a pianist, a musician with something to say. The audience erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. When she finally looked up, she saw Professor Wu in the front row, giving her the rarest of gifts, a full, genuine smile of approval. 6 months had passed since that first night at the restaurant when Lena had asked to play for food. Spring sunshine now warmed the conservatory courtyard where students gathered between classes. Some sprawled on the grass with textbooks, others huddled in small groups discussing upcoming performances. Lena sat alone on a bench, a letter from home in her hands. Her parents had finally saved enough for plane tickets. They were coming to visit next month. The thought of seeing them again after nearly a year apart filled her with a joy so intense it was almost painful. So much had changed. She had changed. "There you are," called a familiar voice. Tanya crossed the courtyard waving a newspaper. "Have you seen this yet?" Lena folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her bag. "Seen what?" Tanya dropped onto the bench beside her, unfolding the arts section of the city newspaper. "This." She pointed to a headline. "Rising Star at City Conservatory. From Homelessness to Standing Ovation." Beneath the headline was a photo of Lena at the piano during her recent solo recital, her face captured in a moment of complete absorption in the music. The article described her journey, from playing for a meal to becoming one of the conservatory's most promising students. It mentioned her upcoming performance with the city orchestra and quoted several faculty members, including Professor Wu, who rarely spoke to the press. "This young woman," Wu had said, "represents what music is truly about, the human spirit expressing itself through sound. Her technical skills are impressive, but it is her life experience that gives her playing its rare emotional depth." Lena stared at the article, embarrassed yet touched. "How did they get this story?" Tanya looked slightly guilty. "That might be my fault. I ran into a reporter at the coffee shop and we got talking about the conservatory. I might have mentioned my amazing friend who went from playing for food to getting a standing ovation from the toughest critics in the city." She squeezed Lena's arm. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. I just thought people should know your story. It might help others who are struggling." Lena couldn't be upset. Tanya had been her most consistent supporter, from offering her couch that first night to attending every performance, no matter how small. Their friendship had deepened beyond their shared immigrant experience to something like family. "It's okay," Lena said finally. "Just weird to see my life laid out like that. Makes it sound more dramatic than it felt living through it." Tanya snorted. "More dramatic? You literally walked into a fancy restaurant starving and walked out with a future. If that's not dramatic, I don't know what is." Before Lena could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "My office, 2 p.m., good news." "Duty calls," she said, showing Tanya the message. "Director Chen wants to see me." Tanya wiggled her eyebrows suggestively. "Probably about this article. You're making the conservatory look good. Taking in the poor hungry pianist. Great PR," Lena laughed, shoving her friend playfully. "Stop it, Robert's not like that. He genuinely cares about music and musicians." She gathered her things. "I should go practice before the meeting. I have a lesson with Wu at 4. Still a taskmaster?" "Always, but in the best way." Lena had come to appreciate Professor Wu's exacting standards and sparse praise. When Wu did offer a compliment, it meant something because you knew it was genuine. As Lena walked toward the practice rooms, several students called out greetings. She was no longer the outsider. She had earned her place here through talent and hard work. The scholarship committee had unanimously approved her application for the next academic year, and her student visa issues were finally resolved, thanks to the conservatory's legal assistance. She spent the next 2 hours working on Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, a showpiece she was preparing for the orchestra concert. The challenging runs and dramatic contrasts suited her growing confidence at the keyboard. As her fingers danced over the keys, she lost herself in the music, time slipping away unnoticed until a knock at the door brought her back to reality. David, her colleague from the scheduling office, poked his head in. "It's almost 2. Aren't you supposed to meet with Director Chen?" Lena jumped up, startled. "Thanks for the reminder." She gathered her music quickly and hurried across the courtyard to the administration building, wondering what Robert's good news might be. She found him in his office, speaking with a well-dressed man she didn't recognize. Both rose as she entered. "Lena, perfect timing," Robert said warmly. "I'd like you to meet Victor Hayes, artistic director of the International Young Musicians Competition in Vienna." Lena's heart skipped a beat as she shook the man's hand. The Vienna competition was one of the most prestigious in the world for pianists under 25, a launching pad for international careers. "Mr. Hayes saw your performance with the chamber ensemble last month and expressed interest in your work," Robert explained, his eyes twinkling with barely contained excitement. "More than interest," Hayes clarified. "I was captivated. Your interpretation of the Schumann was unlike anything I've heard from someone your age. There's a maturity in your playing that can't be taught." Lena stood speechless, her mind racing to process what was happening. Hayes continued, Each year, we invite a small number of exceptional young artists to compete without going through the normal application channels. I'd like to extend such an invitation to you for this summer's competition. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Vienna. The competition. This summer. The words swirled in Lena's mind, enormous in their implications. The winner receives a significant cash prize and concert engagements throughout Europe, Hayes added. But perhaps more importantly, they gain visibility with the top music agencies and orchestras in the world. Robert watched Lena carefully. It's an extraordinary opportunity. The conservatory would sponsor your travel expenses, of course. I don't know what to say, Lena finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Hayes smiled. Say you'll consider it. The level of competition is intense, I won't lie, but I believe you have something special to offer, a voice that deserves to be heard on the world stage. After Hayes left, promising to send formal details, Lena sank into a chair across from Robert's desk, still dazed. This is huge, she said, stating the obvious. It is, Robert agreed. But you're ready for it. He leaned forward. Lena, when I first heard you play at that restaurant, I knew you had rare talent. What I didn't know then was whether you had the discipline and resilience to match. These past 6 months have answered that question definitively. Tears pricked at Lena's eyes. I wouldn't be here without your help. I'd probably still be... Robert held up a hand to stop her. Don't diminish your achievement by focusing on what might have been. You're here because you belong here. Yes, circumstances aligned to give you an opportunity, but you're the one who seized it and transformed it into something remarkable. Lena nodded, trying to absorb his words. My parents are coming next month. I just got their letter today. They'll be here for the orchestra concert. Perfect timing, Robert smiled. They'll see their daughter shine before she conquers. Vienna. The day of the orchestra concert arrived with perfect weather, clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of blooming flowers through the open windows of the concert hall. Lena peeked through the curtains at the filling auditorium, searching the crowd for familiar faces. Tanya was easy to spot in the third row, surrounded by friends who had become Lena's friends too over the past months. Professor Wu sat primly in the front row, her posture impeccable as always. And there, Lena's heart leapt, in seats specially reserved by Robert, sat her parents. They looked older than she remembered, more tired, the months of separation and worry etched into the lines around their eyes. But they were here, beaming with pride, her father in his best suit, her mother wearing the blue dress she saved for special occasions. Lena had met them at the airport yesterday, the reunion so emotional that all three had stood crying in the terminal for long minutes, unable to speak through their joy. Last night they had talked for hours in her small dormitory room, catching up on months of separation, her parents marveling at how much their daughter had changed, not just in appearance but in confidence and purpose. 5 minutes. Miss Lena, the stage manager called, interrupting her thoughts. Backstage, the orchestra musicians were warming up, the discordant sounds of individual practice creating a familiar chaos. As piano soloist, Lena would join them for Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody, the centerpiece of tonight's program. The conductor, Maestro Reyes, stopped by for a final check-in. Ready to dazzle them? He asked with a wink. I hope so, Lena replied, smoothing her concert dress, a simple black gown borrowed from the conservatory's collection for students who couldn't afford formal attire. More than ready, the conductor assured her. Just remember what we discussed in rehearsal. When we hit the Friska section, don't hold back. Let all that fire we know you have come through. Lena nodded, flexing her fingers. The Hungarian Rhapsody began with a slow, melancholy introduction, before building to an explosive, technically demanding finale. It was perfect for showcasing both emotional depth and virtuosic skill, exactly the combination Professor Wu had been nurturing in her for months. The orchestra filed onto the stage to polite applause. Lena waited in the wings, taking deep breaths to calm her racing heart. This wasn't just another student recital. This was her debut with a professional orchestra, her parents watching, and a ticket to Vienna hanging in the balance. The sound of the orchestra tuning to the concertmaster's A faded, and Maestro Reyes took the podium. After the opening piece, it would be her turn. Time seemed to both crawl and fly. Before she knew it, the stage manager was nodding to her, her cue to enter. As she walked onto the stage, the applause swelled. She caught a glimpse of her parents, her mother wiping tears, her father sitting tall with undisguised pride. Lena bowed to the audience, then to the conductor, before settling at the gleaming grand piano. As silence fell over the hall, a strange calm settled over her. 6 months ago, she had sat at another piano, hungry and desperate, playing for her survival. Tonight, she played not from desperation but from choice, playing because music was her voice, her gift to share. The conductor raised his baton, and Lena placed her hands on the keys. The slow, mournful opening of the rhapsody emerged, telling of longing and loss. As the piece progressed, building in intensity and technical fireworks, Lena's fingers flew across the keyboard with precision and passion. When they reached the frisca, the wild, fast section at the end, she remembered the conductor's advice and let go completely, pouring everything into the music. The hunger, the fear, the gratitude, the joy of reunion, the anticipation of Vienna. The orchestra matched her energy, the collaboration between soloist and ensemble seamless and electric. The final chords thundered through the hall, and Lena lifted her hands from the keys, breathless and exhilarated. For a moment there was complete silence, that magical pause that sometimes happens when an audience is truly moved. Then the applause erupted, people rising to their feet in a standing ovation that washed over her like a wave. As she stood to acknowledge the applause, bowing to the audience and then to the orchestra, Lena's gaze found her parents. They were standing too, clapping until their hands must hurt, tears streaming unashamedly down their faces. Behind them, Tanya was whistling loudly with 2 fingers in her mouth. Ignoring the looks from more reserved audience members, Professor Wu, ever dignified, simply nodded once, but the approval in her eyes spoke volumes. And in the back of the hall, Lena spotted a familiar figure, the restaurant manager who had mocked her request that night, now applauding with the rest, witness to how far she had come. As the applause continued, Lena thought of the long journey ahead, Vienna, perhaps a career in Europe, years of practice and performance. The path wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks and disappointments along with triumphs, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned the most important lesson. When life strips everything away, what remains reveals who you truly are. For Lena, what remained had been music, her constant companion through hunger, loneliness, and fear. The notes that had once earned her a meal had now opened doors to the world. And as she took her final bow, she silently thanked the universe for that moment of desperation that had led her to ask a simple question. May I play for a piece of food?